I had woken up that morning feeling unusually tense, though I didn't know why. My husband, Mark, had been oddly quiet for the past few days, his smiles forced and his gestures slightly off. Still, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the stress of work catching up with him. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, humming softly, preparing a cup of coffee for me, the way he always did. But as soon as he handed it to me, I caught a strange, almost chemical-like smell coming from the mug. My instincts screamed that something was wrong, but I hesitated, not wanting to accuse him outright. I watched him closely as he sipped his own coffee, pretending nothing was out of the ordinary, but his eyes flickered nervously when he noticed my hesitation. I set my mug down, pretending to be busy with my phone, and waited. A few minutes later, my sister-in-law, Emma, called, asking if she could stop by for a quick chat. Mark, distracted by his phone, barely noticed her arrival. Emma and I exchanged greetings, and as she leaned on the counter, I noticed her mug sitting untouched, the steam curling up invitingly. A sudden thought struck me. I needed to know if it was the coffee itself or just my imagination. Calmly, I swapped my mug with hers while she wasn't looking, and she continued chatting about mundane things, oblivious to the tiny act that would soon reveal everything. Mark went to take his phone call in the other room, giving me the perfect window to sip the coffee that was supposedly mine but now in Emma's mug. The moment it touched my lips, my stomach dropped. The taste was bitter, chemical, and sickly, confirming my worst fears. I immediately excused myself, claiming I needed fresh air, while carefully observing Mark through the kitchen doorway. His expression when he returned and saw the swapped mugs was subtle but unmistakable, an almost imperceptible panic that he tried to mask. That tiny reaction told me he had expected me to drink the tainted coffee, and my heart raced as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place. I needed to act carefully. Confronting him directly now could escalate the situation dangerously. I decided to play along, keeping my voice steady and my actions normal, while pretending to sip the coffee from Emma's original mug. Mark watched, his posture stiff, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his own cup. He muttered something about not feeling well, claiming he needed to step out for a quick walk, leaving me alone with Emma. I immediately told Emma I needed to check something quickly in the living room, urging her to sit and relax. My mind was racing, piecing together the strange behavior I had noticed over the past week, the unusual work trips, the late-night phone calls he tried to hide, and now this poisoned coffee. I realized I had been lucky. Had I not trusted my instincts and swapped mugs, I could have ended up seriously ill. As I sat on the couch, I silently thanked myself for noticing the subtle cues, the uneasy energy in the room that I had instinctively felt but couldn't name until now. I took a deep breath, realizing I needed evidence before making any accusations. I carefully retrieved the swapped mugs from the kitchen, making sure Mark hadn't touched them yet, and moved them to a safe spot in the pantry. When Mark returned, pretending to be casual, I asked him if he wanted to sit with me while Emma finished her coffee. He hesitated for a split second, and I caught it. He knew he had been caught in the act. That tiny hesitation was all I needed to confirm my suspicion. The rest of the morning passed with forced smiles and small talk, but my mind was in overdrive. By the time Emma left, I had devised a plan. I needed to confront him, but not recklessly. I placed the evidence, the coffee mugs with the suspicious liquid carefully sealed in a plastic bag, and called a trusted friend who was a toxicology expert. She agreed to analyze the liquid immediately. While waiting for her call, I pretended to carry on with my day, cooking breakfast and tidying the living room, all the while keeping an eye on Mark. His nervous energy was palpable. He avoided my gaze, fiddling with his watch, pacing subtly, and muttering under his breath. When my friend called back, confirming the presence of a toxic substance in the coffee, my heart sank but my resolve strengthened. I now had concrete proof, not just a gut feeling. I calmly texted Mark, asking him to meet me in the living room, and when he came, I laid out the evidence in front of him. His face went pale, his confident facade crumbling as he stuttered, trying to explain, but the words failed him. I told him I had swapped the mugs with Emma's, saving myself from what could have been a dangerous incident. His expression shifted from panic to desperation as he realized the gravity of his actions. I made it clear that this was not just about the coffee, it was about trust, safety, and the realization that I could no longer ignore the warning signs that I had sensed for days. He tried to justify his actions, but I stayed composed, letting him know that the authorities and my friend's analysis were now involved, and that any further manipulation or deception would only worsen the situation. The confrontation was tense, silent for moments that felt like hours, with him staring at the mugs and then at me, realizing that his plan had been thwarted by nothing more than my intuition and quick thinking. I sat down, heart still racing, but with a newfound sense of empowerment, knowing I had acted decisively when it mattered most. The experience changed the dynamics of our household completely. Mark retreated into himself, aware that his intentions had been exposed, and I knew I had to establish boundaries to protect my safety. That evening, as I reflected on the day's events, I felt a mix of relief, fear, and a strange sense of victory. I had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a moment of clarity, realizing the importance of trusting my instincts and taking action without hesitation. The memory of that first whiff of coffee, the strange smell that had alerted me to danger, remained vivid, a reminder that small signs often carry the weight of life-altering consequences. Over the next few days, I monitored every interaction, making sure that I maintained control over the household environment and that no further risks were posed. I shared the analysis with Emma discreetly, ensuring she understood what had happened and why her mug had been part of the test. Together, we devised a plan to avoid any future incidents, agreeing to be vigilant and cautious in every interaction, while keeping the incident private to avoid unnecessary drama. Looking back, I realized that the day had been a turning point, not just in my relationship with Mark, but in my own ability to recognize danger, act decisively, and assert control over a situation that could have had devastating consequences. That single moment, the decision to swap mugs, had been the difference between disaster and survival, proving that intuition, courage, and careful planning can overcome even the most unexpected threats in everyday life. After the shocking coffee incident, life at home had shifted into a tense, almost fragile routine. Mark was quieter than usual, moving around the house with exaggerated care, his every gesture laced with the subtle guilt and fear I knew he felt. I, on the other hand, became hyper-aware, noticing every twitch, every glance, every offhand remark, carefully cataloging them in my mind. The day after the mug swap, I decided it was time to test the limits of his behavior. I prepared my morning coffee as usual, but this time I added nothing suspicious, only observing how he reacted to my normalcy. He approached with his usual forced cheer, smiling weakly, handing me my cup, but I could see the anxiety lurking in his eyes. He tried small talk, asking about my plans for the day, about work emails, about mundane things that now felt loaded with tension. I nodded, sipping my coffee deliberately slowly, watching him as I weighed my next move. My mind was racing. I knew I couldn't let him off the hook entirely, but I also needed to maintain control and gather more information. As the morning passed, I noticed subtle signs. A quick glance at my bag as if checking for evidence, a slightly too long pause when I mentioned Emma's visit the day before, and an almost imperceptible shift when I casually mentioned I had saved the mugs for a little experiment. I decided it was time to push further. I reached out to a trusted friend in law enforcement, explaining the situation, and she advised me to stay vigilant while she looked into potential legal measures. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything, photographing the mugs, keeping a log of Mark's odd behavior, and noting any suspicious activity, all the while maintaining the facade of normal life. That evening, I invited Emma over again under the guise of needing her help with a small home project. She arrived, cheerful and unsuspecting, and I discreetly asked her to be observant, to notice anything unusual in Mark's demeanor. As we worked together, I could see him watching from the kitchen, moving as if he wanted to intervene but hesitated, restrained by the knowledge that he had already been caught once. The tension was thick, almost tangible, but I maintained my calm, using it as leverage to observe him more closely. It was then that I noticed him pulling out a small, unmarked envelope from his drawer, something he tried to hide as soon as he realized I was looking. My heart pounded. I couldn't confront him outright yet. I needed to know what was inside first. I waited until he left the room, then discreetly opened the envelope, discovering receipts, vague notes, and references to unusual purchases, things that now painted a clear picture of premeditation and intent. Panic and adrenaline surged through me, but I kept my composure, knowing that my next steps would determine how I handled the situation without escalating it into immediate danger. Over the next few days, I continued to play the role of the unsuspecting wife, letting him believe that I had moved past the coffee incident, while secretly collecting evidence and strengthening my position. One afternoon, I noticed him making furtive calls, speaking in hushed tones, clearly trying to cover his tracks. That was the moment I decided to confront him directly, but not recklessly. I set up a controlled environment, asking him to sit down for a serious conversation, while having my friend on standby for advice and support. He tried to smile, attempting to diffuse the tension, but I could see it failing. I calmly laid out the evidence I had gathered: the mugs, the analysis of the coffee, the envelope, the receipts, and even his suspicious behavior over the past weeks. His face turned pale, a mixture of guilt, fear, and disbelief crossing his features. I watched him closely, letting the weight of his actions sink in, making it clear that I had nothing to hide, that I was prepared to escalate matters legally if necessary. For the first time, I saw the real Mark. No mask, no charm, only a man confronted with the consequences of his intentions. He stammered, attempting explanations, but the words were hollow, unconvincing. I held my ground, firm yet composed, making it clear that any further manipulation or deception would be met with immediate action. The room was silent for a moment, filled only with the tension of unspoken thoughts and the weight of reality. Then, unexpectedly, he broke down, confessing not just the plan with the coffee but other manipulations he had tried to carry out, a web of lies I had only partially suspected until now. It was horrifying and surreal, hearing the details of schemes I had never imagined, but I remained composed, taking mental notes, understanding that this confession would serve as undeniable proof if legal intervention became necessary. I realized that the coffee incident had been just the tip of the iceberg. His intentions were deeper, more calculated than I had initially feared. I decided to use this moment to assert control, setting strict boundaries, making it clear that I would no longer tolerate deception or threats, and that my priority was my safety above all else. Over the next week, I implemented a careful strategy, documenting interactions, keeping friends and family informed without alarming them unnecessarily, and maintaining a calm demeanor to prevent Mark from realizing the full extent of my preparations. I also increased my awareness of my surroundings, ensuring that any attempt at sabotage or manipulation would be immediately noticed. Slowly, I began to feel a sense of empowerment, knowing that the tables had turned, that his plans had been foiled by nothing more than my vigilance, intuition, and careful action. I even involved Emma subtly, ensuring she understood the importance of staying alert and reporting anything suspicious, creating a small network of awareness that strengthened my position. By the time episode 4 arrived, I was ready for the final confrontation. I asked Mark to join me in a neutral space, a public cafe, claiming it was for a casual conversation. There, I laid everything out again: evidence, analysis, his confession, and the steps I had taken to protect myself. The gravity of the situation hit him fully this time. No hiding, no manipulation, just reality. I calmly informed him of the legal options available, the potential consequences, and made it clear that any further attempt to deceive or harm me would be met with swift action. He was visibly shaken, the confident, controlling man I had known reduced to a shell, unable to argue, unable to manipulate, and finally, powerless. Sitting there, I felt a mix of relief, fear, and vindication. The ordeal had been terrifying, but it had also taught me the power of intuition, observation, and decisive action. I realized that one small decision, the mug swap, had changed everything. It had not only saved my life but had also given me the clarity and control to navigate a situation that could have ended disastrously. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, with him silently acknowledging the consequences of his actions. I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not just for myself, but for ensuring that boundaries were clear, that trust was never compromised again, and that vigilance became a daily practice. That day marked a turning point, the moment I reclaimed control over my life and my safety, proving that courage, awareness, and careful planning could overcome even the most insidious threats from someone I once trusted completely. By evening, I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the world had not changed, but my perception and handling of it had. Mark, aware that his games had been exposed, retreated into silence, and I allowed myself a quiet victory, grateful that I had trusted my instincts, acted decisively, and ultimately survived a situation that could have ended far worse. From that day onward, I became vigilant, empowered, and ready for anything, knowing that sometimes, the smallest actions, like swapping a coffee mug, can change the course of life entirely. The days after the confrontation felt surreal, as though I were living in a heightened reality where every glance, every word carried weight. Mark had become a shadow of himself, his usual arrogance replaced by a quiet, simmering tension, and I made sure to maintain vigilance without giving him any opportunity to manipulate or regain control. I continued documenting everything, but now it was less about collecting evidence and more about reclaiming my space, my autonomy, and my sense of safety. One morning, I decided it was time to take the final step, ensuring that no trace of his dangerous intentions could threaten me again. I calmly packed the suspicious mugs, the analysis reports, the receipts, and his confession, and made copies to store with my trusted friend, creating an unshakable safety net. Then, with a steady hand, I approached him, not with anger but with unwavering resolve. I told him clearly that our relationship had reached a point where trust could no longer exist, that his actions had crossed boundaries that could never be repaired, and that I was taking steps to protect myself legally, emotionally, and physically. His attempt at excuses and manipulation fell flat. He was fully aware that the game was over. I could see the realization in his eyes, the understanding that I had outmaneuvered him not through threats or aggression but through careful observation, instinct, and decisive action. I informed him that he would be leaving the house temporarily while arrangements were made to secure both our safety and his accountability, emphasizing that any attempt to interfere or manipulate further would result in immediate legal consequences. That day, as he packed his things in silence, I felt a mixture of relief and empowerment, the relief that I had survived his attempt to harm me and the empowerment that came from taking control of a situation that had been dangerous from the start. I walked through the house afterward, touching familiar corners and breathing in deeply, knowing that I had reclaimed not just physical space but emotional freedom as well. I reached out to Emma, explaining everything in detail, ensuring she understood the severity of what had happened, and together we developed a plan to maintain vigilance, support each other, and prevent future risks. The days turned into weeks, and gradually, life began to feel normal again, though I never forgot the lessons learned. I became more attuned to subtle signs, more confident in trusting my instincts, and more determined to protect my boundaries at all costs. Eventually, legal measures were put into place, ensuring Mark could not pose a threat again, and the peace that followed was quiet but profound. Sitting in my kitchen one morning, sipping a simple cup of coffee, without fear, without suspicion, I reflected on how a single moment of intuition, the simple act of swapping mugs, had changed everything. It had revealed truth, saved me from harm, and ultimately empowered me to take control of my life. The experience left scars, yes, but also a profound sense of strength. I realized that survival often depends not on confrontation but on observation, calm strategy, and decisive action. And as I looked out the window, feeling sunlight on my face and a calmness I hadn't known in months, I understood that I had emerged not as a victim but as someone who had faced deception, danger, and betrayal, and had come out stronger, wiser, and unshakably in control of her own life. From that day on, I carried forward a sense of empowerment that no one could take away, knowing that courage and careful action had rewritten the course of my story, and the threat that once hung over me was finally gone.